Welcome to the Three Men Down, an eight-man football show, the channel dedicated to breaking down the game of eight-man football. This isn't just highlights and scores. Here we focus on the strategy, the schemes, and the details that actually win games. From offensive concepts and defensive adjustments to film breakdowns and coaching ideas, this channel is built for players, coaches, and true fans of eight-man football. If you want to understand the game on a deeper level and learn how teams create advantages on the field, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and join us as we break down the X's and O's of eight-man football. First ever episode of, whether we want to call it a YouTube channel or a podcast, called Three Man Down, an eight-man football show. I'm Coach Mendina from Norway, Michigan, and this is Coach Barrett with me on the other side, and we're going to kind of just spend some time casually talking about football, but more specifically focused on eight-man football, which I feel like we're probably the first two guys sitting in their basement here in the UP in a snowstorm ever doing this. So I think this is going to be fun. We're going to kind of shoot from the hip a little bit. Hopefully, as we go along, we get a little bit better. But for me, this is my first time ever doing something like this.
No, I mean, I think what you just said, right? The sort of idea here is when we made this transition to eight-man football, there is nothing like this for guys like us. There are no resources. I mean, if there are, I'd be welcome to seeing them. But as far as we know, it doesn't exist. So we figured, why not, right? Help somebody out, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I know when we went, I mean, you and I played 11-man football, coached it. I mean, we went to eight-man football in 2021, I believe. I really had no idea. I mean, I coached defense. You've coached offense. Where do you start? And you go online and there's thousands of websites and websites you can pay to and websites that you can just read. But when you type in eight-man football specifically, there really is nothing. It's maybe a guy drawn on a chalkboard, a few plays here and there. It doesn't get you real far. So I think, our options were, let's look in the area of the teams that do it best around us. And we're pretty fortunate, I guess, to have some really good teams in our area. And that's kind of how we learn. But I think it'd be nice for, nationwide or UP wide to have a channel where people can maybe ask questions and we can bring people in and talk a little bit more about eight-man football. So
That's it.
we're going to have a list of questions here, topics to talk about. Hopefully we don't ramble too long, but I think now that we know why we're doing this, let's just kind of dive right in. And I think the first question, a lot of these first couple questions or topics are, we know eight-man football kind of favors the offense. So let's just kind of start out. And I know you kind of want to dive into this a little bit, but just the geometry of the field, right? I mean, eight-man football fields are smaller. We still play in an 80-yard field as far as the length goes, but it's much narrower. It's 40 yards. I mean, what's your take on how that kind of changes the philosophy on offense?
Well, I think the first time you see the field as a coach without players on it, it does come across as real small. Like you said, it's 100 yards long, but you're cutting 10%, 20% of the width of the field off. The difference, though, and it's kind of strange, right? Because the field itself is smaller, but once you have the players on the field, it does start to look a lot larger. A lot of this is region specific. Like we play a lot of teams that play very aggressive defense. So from an offensive perspective, right, like the line of scrimmage is still crowded, but there is all this open space behind it. And it really is a matter of like, hey, am I just looking at this field without guys on there? And when I look at it, yeah, it's small. But as soon as you get players on there and as soon as they start coming after you, the back end widens a lot and the edges widen a lot. And you can manipulate that too, obviously, right? Like if we play with shorter edges, generally, and this is something I'll come back to later, but the shorter you can create your edge on offense, right, the shorter the edge is going to be the defense. And that's just how most of these teams play. And it opens up a lot of space in the flat, opens up a lot of space on the edge, and there's a lot of space over the top. And, we've played some teams from the lower peninsula of Michigan, and they generally like to take away some of that space downfield a little bit more than the teams up here. But yeah, I mean, you could do math and figure it out. But generally, if we're talking coverage defenders, there's it's like 33% more space per coverage defender on an eight-man field. That math kind of speaks for itself, right? If teams are playing the box like the teams up here do, you just do end up with more space in that second and third level. So despite what it looks like, right, when you don't have kids out there, and despite the dimensions, the space is obvious. It's one of the first things you notice when you watch an 8-man football game. The first thing I notice, right, is there's a lot of space if you know how to get it,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, and I agree. When you're coaching the defense and you see that, I feel like the field's smaller, but everything's magnified more. Like you're gonna have guys on islands, and you see the aggressive defenses because nobody punts in 8-man football. So you have to find a way to create a negative play, whether it's on first, second, or third down. Because if it's 4th and 3, 4th and 4, 4th and 6, they're going for it because the scoring it's going to happen. So if you don't keep pace and you're punting, it's tough. So to me, the toughest thing, that field's smaller. There are some advantages with that. Now the hashes do get moved in a little bit. But the short side of the field to me is almost a little bit off limits as far as running a toss or a sweep in that direction. Now some teams will do it, but to me, it just magnified everything. That field got smaller, but there's still all that extra space, like you said. And if you're not aggressive defensively on the line, like most teams we see, you get a light box, you snap it to that quarterback, and you just run it 3, 4 yards at a crack. And it's pretty tough to slow down if you're not aggressive because, these teams are good at it. And a lot of these teams from this area have done it for a long time.
Yeah, and like I think you touched on something important there, which is like the mentality of the game, right? Which is, I mean, it's hyper aggressive. Even the teams that don't try to take you over the top, which obviously we love, but the teams that don't try to take us over the top, that, like you said, they're playing 4 downs, and especially with the extra space in the second level, if they can wear you down, right, that's when those cracks start to show. I get asked a lot about the primary difference between the two games. And I think people see the score, like you mentioned, and go, well, how could that be, right? That great of a game, right? If the scores are, teams are scoring 50, 60, 70 points.
Mhm.
But it really, like you said, it just magnifies everything, right? If you have one kid that can't tackle, if you have one kid that can't cover, if you have one kid that can't defeat a block, man, you're going to have a long night, right? That extra space creates that. And just like, I mean, you got fewer guys, which we'll get into as we get into this. But yeah, everything is magnified. I like the way you put that. That's pretty much what it comes down to.
Yeah, like you said, it's hard to hide people. I think 11-man football, sometimes you can get some guys in the field and might be able to hide them, but man, those guys can really stick out on an 8-man game. So kind of continue with that, like personnel shifts. We got three few players on each side of the ball, right? So that creates that more space. Obviously, you're going to eliminate 2 offensive tackles. So basically, you got your center and 2 guards and a skill player, whether that's a back or receiver, however you want to look at it. How for you has the eligibility rule, where the ends and all the backs are eligible, change your offensive identity?
Well, I mean, like number one, the elimination of the tackles means that if you want, right, if you want that larger blocking face, you're going to have a guy in your team who's like a real tight end, right? A guy who can be involved in the blocking game, right, all the time, and then can also take a linebacker with a route. And we've had that in the past, and that's something that I've coached offenses. We've coached teams that we've relied on that. We've had some good guys in that position. But from a scheme perspective, there's also the way that you can take advantage of teams, right? When you take a tackle off the field and you put another skill player on the edge, if that kid can block at all, you're putting a linebacker in a tough position. And we try to do this with cornerbacks too, right? With the short edges.
Mhm.
We try to make those guys, hey, if they're not a good tackler, we're going to make them tackle, right? Whether that's a cornerback or a linebacker.
Mm.
And then if that guy is great and is a good tackler, if he's good at defeating blocks, we're going to try to make him cover somebody. So having that key piece, and a lot of this comes down to who you have on your team,
Right.
but having that piece, right? If we're going to eliminate a tackle, well, can I simulate a tackle with a guy who can also go score a touchdown if we need him to, right? So that is pretty much it. The other thing that it creates is, because we have those shorter edges, right? Once you've eliminated those tackles, and if you take that guy out of the box entirely, like we're talking another receiver, you really are shortening those edges. And if you can shorten the edge, man, you can do some interesting stuff. We're going to talk later about just straight eliminating, guys we don't even have to block, don't even think about it.
Right.
And we do a lot of that. So yeah, you put a lot of pressure on teams to have somebody that can match a guy who, is a true tight end, but in our game, functions like a tackle and then functions
Right.
like a wide receiver. If you get a guy who can do that, you can do a lot. So yeah.
Yeah.
What about like on defense? And I can't imagine having to try to plan for stuff like this. And this is why 8-man football is sort of weighted towards the offense. Where do you sacrifice players? Like what are you taking off the field?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing defensively is there's not a lot of room for that big slow guy anymore. That, if you got a center and two guards and you got that short edge, I mean, your D line, even your big guys, they got to be fast. So, I feel like you play a lot of man. To me, I kind of relate it to basketball. It's like your man to man defense out there. I got you, you got him, and you got to know your assignment, and you better know your keys because you're gonna have to react quick. And hopefully, you have some instinctual guys that don't have to think a lot. But to me, you almost in 8-man football, and obviously all football, but you have to eliminate some thinking because they have to react so quick because you know most teams are snapping to their quarterback and he's running the ball. There's no handoff. If there's a handoff, that's usually an advantage to the defense because they can get there quicker. But to me, it just eliminated that spot for that big, slow kind of defensive tackles out there that are just going to take up space because your nose guard has to chase down a guy from behind. Whoever's over the guard has to, if he's pulling, he's got to chase that guy down and make the tackle. So it took me a few years to realize we got to get faster. And I think anybody can say that in any sport, but I think at 8-man football, it's again more magnified. You cannot have big, slow guys out there because teams will just run away from you. And
Well, and you're talking about, yeah, when you talk about combining players, a lot of the teams that we play against on offense, the players that they're combining, the skill players, are the running back and the quarterback,
right.
right? Like that, they're eliminating the need for a halfback, which is tough to deal with because then you can still spread teams out, right?
Yep.
Which we see a lot of.
Yep.
But yeah, there's no more of me in the trenches down there, some guy who can't move.
Yeah, you gotta have some, that you can get those guys in there, but they got to be able to move. You got to get your biggest guys to be able to move too. And obviously, if you can get a guy like that
Yeah.
that can do both, that's great. So, kind of moving on here, right? So, scoring pace. We know 8-player football is high scoring. You're going to see teams go 40, 50, 60 points, sometimes in a half, right? How do you kind of manage that psychological side? And maybe this is more towards me, but preventing a touchdown. But I guess I would point it towards you. Like, I feel like there's probably more pressure on the offensive coaches because you feel like you do have to score every time.
Well, I'm lucky because I have a good defensive coordinator. But yeah, I mean, there's pressure every time, right? If you're playing a good team, that's sort of the mindset. You got to score, and then you got to go convert a 2-point conversion too, which
Right.
we've struggled
easy to
with in
do,
the past. But it's kind of what it comes down to, right? Like, and the kids know this, which keeping it light and making sure that they know that you're going to have another opportunity, right, is really important because it can start to feel like you're not, right? When you play these good teams and they get rolling, it can be really hard to steal a possession back, which we know, right? We've seen that. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure. You try not to, still got to be fun, but it does in these big games, man, like if you're not scoring 75% of the time, it's going to be hard to keep pace.
Right.
So, yeah. We've been lucky, right? We've had a lot of good players, and that has also shown up in defensive side of the ball, though. For as hard as it is to stop the good teams, you know how to do that. You've shown me you know how to do that. So how do you handle because I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but like you have had to change the way that you think about coaching defense from 11 to 8-man, and the idea that, hey, we're going to give up touchdowns, right? Where in the past that maybe wasn't the way that you thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the first thing I wrote here when I looked at that question was it took me a while to accept that giving up a touchdown was going to happen. Now, obviously, you give up touchdowns in 11-man football, but, to me, when we were coaching 11-man, you're trying to hold those teams to 2 touchdowns. And, if they get a third, okay. But you get to the 8-man game. Now, we've had some really good players and some good defenses, right? But in general, if you can keep, 3 touchdowns or less, and sometimes even 4, right? If we're putting up 50, that's enough. But at first, you feel like you're not doing your job. There's touchdowns, and you're going to see some big plays. So to me, I just looked at how can you steal possessions, and then coaching your guys that okay, we are going to give up some points, but how can we get some stolen possessions? So obviously, the first spot I went to was let's focus on creating turnovers, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that. focusing on that in practice, and we put a lot of focus into not turning the ball over. I feel like we're probably one of the better teams year in and year out at not turning the football over, and we preach that a lot. So I think trying to get those extra possessions and accepting that, okay, you can't go crazy on the kids if you give up a touchdown. It's going to happen. I mean, there's good players on the other side of the football too, and there's a lot of open space. And I think, but yeah, that took me a couple of years to accept that, and I'm still kind of adjusting to it. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's a challenge. That's why it's fun. That's why it's fun to do. So yeah, I'm getting used to it. All right, coach, you want to try and
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
the turnover thing is really important, right? If you had asked me, it told me how much time we were going to spend focusing on, hey, how do we take the ball away from guys, or how do we punch the ball, how do we rip, how do we do all that kind of stuff. If you had told me the amount of time we were going to spend on it a couple of years ago, I'd have been shocked. But that has definitely paid off, right? Like our kids know, or your kids know, right? They're punching at the ball, they're ripping at the ball, and they're jumping on it too. And that's an important part as well, right? Not just getting it out, but getting on top of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, those things can feel like disasters too. Like, if I throw a pick in an 11-man football game, that's not good. But if I throw a pick in an 8-man football game, there's a good chance that's a 16-point swing, right?
Right.
Depending on who you're playing against. But yeah, I mean, possessions, you'd think there's more possessions. Hey, they're not at a premium, but they are absolutely at a premium. I mean, our tape is 140 plays per game.
Right.
And you need all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. You want to take the lead on the segment too?
Sure. Yeah. All right. So we're going to move into some stuff that's a little more geared towards philosophy and head coaching stuff, which is your role in our program. And I am very interested to hear some of your response to these. I feel like I know some of it, but I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to articulate it really. So number one, most teams that play 8-man football because of small enrollment, right? You get declining enrollment, not as many kids, not as many football players, meaning that everybody's got to play both ways, right? Like we talked about it all year. We got to have 8, right? If we have 8, we'll be great, right? As soon as you fall below 8, you start running into problems. But that means that players are being asked to play a lot, right? And special teams too. So how do you, as a head coach, think about handling players who either get worn out or in practice? How do you deal with just a lack of quality, like scout teams or look teams? Not that we had quality look teams, but I could see it becoming a problem in the future.
Yeah, I think keeping those guys fresh is so different than the way we trained when we were coached. You just went at it every day, Monday through Thursday, and then by the time you got to the game Friday, you were sore as all heck, and you were already kind of worn out from the week. So I think for me, it's just, and obviously you get to know your players and you can read them and you can talk to them, but you come in on Monday, how do you feel? Let's kind of keep it light on Monday. I always have in the back of my mind, how can I have these guys as healthy and as fresh as we can have them on Friday? Because yeah, if we can get a great scout team look on Wednesday and hit a little bit, that's great. But that's not as important to me as my guys being fresh on Friday, because that's all that matters. If we pound them into the ground Tuesday, Wednesday, go a lighter practice Thursday, they're still going to be sore. And it doesn't matter how many plays they know or how well they ran them in practice. If they're worn out physically and mentally, it doesn't matter. So and that's just different than we were coached. It's different than we were brought up. You got to be tough. You got to keep going, right? And I think, when you talk about not getting scout looks, I mean, that can come down to our team this year. Obviously, it was a lot of seniors, and it was as important. Maybe down the road, you'll see it affect the game a little bit more. But I just had to shift from, okay, we're going to beat these guys up every day, to, okay, how can I not beat them up? And honestly, I think for me, it made me a better coach. I had to learn different ways of doing things, and it really made you focus in on your teaching, your technique. We probably tackle more in practice than we did 3 years ago, and not live tackling. We found ways that you could safely do it and not get guys hurt because, like you said, there's not a lot of backups. So you have to find a way to tackle an 8-man football in practice, because you got to be really good at it in the open field. So for me, it was that. And then lastly, just psychologically, we talked about it a lot before going into this past season. Like, how can we get our guys more mentally tough? Because they're not coming out of the game. They have to stay in there. And to me, that wasn't a physical thing. I mean, these guys are in good shape. They work out. We train them all summer. But mentally, could they handle it? When they got a little bump, could they stay in there? Because they needed to. And these, if you want to win a state championship, like teams around us have done, they have, to me, the mental side of it's more important or just as important as the physical side. So yeah, it was an adjustment. I mean, what's your take? Obviously, you're at our practices and you kind of see what we do, and I know I feel like it's worked out pretty well.
Oh yeah, I love it. I mean, as a player, right? I mean, we all think back to high school football 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and it was just a grind and it was war every day at practice,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of guys, I mean, we all know the guys, right? The guys who burned
Mhm.
out by the time they were a junior or by the
Yep.
time they were a senior, and it just was too much, whether too much physically or just too much, not building that mental toughness,
Mhm.
and they just didn't have it, have the capacity for it. The thing that struck me this year about the mental toughness side of it was that that's something that you really focused on. We really focused on, but you primarily focused on, and you extended that focus into games, right? So my natural reaction to, hey, a guy's telling me he's winded in the middle of a series or whatever is, okay, let's get his backup in. And I remember you stopped me early in a game. We had a guy trying to take himself out of a game, right? And not because he was injured, not because he was hurt, but because he was starting to feel a little worn down. And I think, your point to me on that was like, this is when we're going to train that, right? This is what he's got to learn, that he's not at his limit, which for me was a shift, right? I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you really focused on that. That's something that you came into the year really focused on. And I think I mean, by the end of the year, like our guys, nobody wanted to come out, right? Ever. The only reason anybody ever came out was, catastrophic stuff. But beyond
Right.
that, they really responded to that, and everybody responded to that too. Not just the 8 guys, not just the 9 guys,
Mhm.
not just the 10 guys, but up and down the roster. I mean, guys didn't were not pulling themselves out of practice. We're not pulling themselves out of games. And, I think a lot of that is one, the mental toughness part, and two, like you're saying, like we didn't beat them to death during the
Right.
week, right? And kids, I don't think want that anymore. There was a little bit of glory in that in 2007, but it's kind of gone away, right? They don't think that way. That's not what these kids want. They want to play hard and they want to work hard and they want to win, but they're not necessarily all for showing up just to get their head beat in by some kid who's 2 years older than them, and for good reason.
Yeah, and then that last point you just made, right? I mean, you're a lot of times practicing with your freshmen and sophomores with the varsity,
Yeah.
and you can't let that affect. You have to let those guys practice with the varsity, and if you're just pounding them, it doesn't work. But I feel like you said, like guys not wanting to come out, it didn't happen right away. But if you can just push them a little bit psychologically, push them a little bit, by the time, like you said, we got to the middle of the season, nobody was pulling themselves out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to say, I mean, they felt the responsibility to stay on the field. And I saw
Yeah.
guys that, 2 years prior, a bump on the elbow would have knocked them out. And then I saw guys that, had some pretty significant bumps and bruises I'm staying in, which was
Yeah.
not just for football, but just in life. It was good for them.
Yeah. So, like when we're talking about, hey, we only got 8 guys, 9 guys, whatever, part of what gets taken out of that is the specialized players, right? That's deep benches for sure, but it's
Mhm.
also just a guy who kicks, right? Like the team I played on growing up, every team I ever played on, there was a kicker, and that's all that guy did, right? And holders, which we have never used in a game, right? We practice, but we
Right.
don't use it. So do you miss that, right? Is there some part of like, hey, that third phase of the game that I mean, it used to be a huge advantage to have a kid who could make a field goal, right? We're
Right.
just taking that off the table almost completely. Is that something that you miss about putting a team together and coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think we practiced it every week this year, I think, and I think we did it one time, right? It was just kind of one
Yeah,
of those things. Hey, it's the kids liked it. It was fun, but we pretty much knew we were never going to do it. But I think we let Josh our kicker there, kick one, and he did make it. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't miss that. I guess I miss more like, special teams, the opening kickoff, right? I mean, I feel like an eight-man football, you just squibbing it or kicking it, on a bounce or there's not that thrill of the opening kickoff as much anymore. A lot of teams are kicking
right.
onside kicks every time. So that's kind of taken that away. I do kind of miss that. Obviously, punting, you never want to punt. So I don't miss that a whole lot because we don't do it a whole lot anyways, and you don't get a lot of punt returns. But I think what I miss most about not having some guys that can come in and play is you never really during the game, you get to talk to the quarterback, but you never really get to talk to your players. You get a
Yeah,
timeout, you get maybe an end of the quarter, and obviously you get your halftime, but you don't, if you see something happening and you want to talk to your guy, well, you're going to wait a while, so
Yeah.
I think that's probably what I miss as far as like not having a bench where you got 20 guys and you can get a guy a blow and talk to him briefly before you send him back out there. I feel like I miss that. But as far as like the specialist stuff go, I mean, yeah, I think I just miss that thrill of the opening kickoff where it's going to get kicked deep. There's going to be a couple of hits and you're going to see, can a guy take it, I mean, look at our team this year. I don't think they kicked it to us one time. See, we never had a kick return, a true kick return. It was basically a squib or an onside kick, even in the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, when you got Mr. Football returning kicks, right?
Yeah.
People are going to try to avoid him. Yeah, I mean, like you're saying in the onside kick thing, right? There were games where we had a playoff game where I don't know, they kicked off 4 times and they were all onside kicks, right? And they caught us on one too, because that's a hard thing for a kid to, I got to know all the offense, I got to know the defense. I'm never allowed to leave the field, and now I'm fielding onside kicks, right? And some of those guys are, hey, I'm a defensive tackle with
Right.
decent hands, right? So I'm out here trying to hold on to the football for our guys. Yeah, it's a lot. And you were talking about the punting thing. Like, I mean, like you said, I mean, even teams, you're just, teams you go out and they can't move the ball on you, they're still not going to punt, right? Because that's the white flag in an 8-man football. You put that thing up and the thing, it's over, right? Especially if you're outgunned. So yeah, I don't miss special teams either. I'd rather pretend like it's illegal, but yeah,
I think we punted a couple times this year, but
yeah,
not much.
I mean, you got it, right? There's situations where you don't have a choice, but
right.
All right. Back to the scheme side of things. We're talking about taking players off the field earlier. One of the things you brought up, we don't play with a deep safety, and we've played some teams that do. We've played teams that play like a 2-high shell, and those guys are coming down at the snap of the football.
Yep.
And then we get some single high, but we generally, I mean, we have players we call safeties, but I wouldn't describe them as being, real coverage safeties, which puts every coverage defender on an island. That's linebacker, safety, cornerbacks teams play with. How do you, and I know this isn't your position group, but like, is there a mentality you're trying to instill in your cornerbacks or your coverage players? Or is there a certain way that you have to teach that technique that might be different than 11 football?
Yeah, I think right out of the gates, right, you're not going to have a lot of safety help. Like you said, you're on an island. If you get beat and they have a decent quarterback,
it's going to be a long night.
It's probably a touchdown, right? And it's hard. Like, I mean, at first, when we went to 8-man football, our corners were coverage guys. I mean, that's your job, your coverage, right? Yeah. Well, quickly you realize if those guys don't get involved in the run game, they can cover all they want. If they're going to, they're just going to run the ball down your throat, right? So,
yeah, right.
I think for me, it was how can I get these guys confident? How can I give them the biggest advantage I can give them? And that for me, and I watch a lot of film, right? If I can, and my brother Tony, right? He coaches the secondary and he's really good at it. And then how can we get these guys in the best alignment, give them the best technique, but then really teach them, it seems simple, but when to expect the pass. I mean, to you and I, it seems obvious, right? It's 3rd and 20. They're probably going to throw. Well, for a high school kid, and a lot of kids don't watch football anymore, it's not as obvious, right? So how can I get them just one little, even if it's a millisecond advantage, whether it's an alignment or, what's their key read? What are they reading on the guy they're defending, right? Does he have a signal where you can tell he's going to go out for a pass, right? I mean, I think they have to be aggressive. So you have to find a way to give them some confidence. So they're confident in themselves doing what they got to do. And then how can I get them something to speed up the process a little bit quicker instead of just saying, well, watch your guy and then come late on the run, because it's not going to work, because you really have to, those guys have to run the alley and they have to be good tacklers. So I think for when we teach a secondary, it's all about who can tackle, who can recover late, because there's probably going to be some late recoveries, and then who can play the ball on those late recoveries. And I know Tony coaches that a lot, kind of chasing that down from behind and then finding the football. I think they've done pretty good at that. And the fun thing about it, you tell them you're going to get a lot of jump balls, right? It's going to be going up for a rebound. I think we've had some guys that have been really good at going up and getting that ball. But yeah, I mean, it's scary when you line up and, even on 3rd and long, right? And it's like, well, this guy's somebody's still going to be on an island. It doesn't matter what you try and do. You don't have the cover 2 shell. You don't have a cover 3 shell, and you don't have a cover 4. So yeah, but that's kind of, to me, it's just a lot of film. Get them a little bit quicker read so they can kind of take advantage of whatever we can find for them.
Yeah. There's two things there you brought up that I mean, it just rang really true, which is number one, the amount of kids who watch football. I mean, we have our halfback this year is a kid who I don't know if he ever watched a football game until he was like a sophomore or junior in high school. So when he's on the JV team, he has almost no idea what's going on, right? And we've
Mhm.
had guys like that before who, you're sitting there teaching them stuff and you're talking about the game and they ask you some simple question like, how many quarters are there or whatever, and you're like, dude, we are in the second game of the year. But right, like I think film from you, and also just we have a lot of guys who like watching a lot of film.
Mhm.
We give them access to huddle. Most teams do, right? And the more time they spend with that, hopefully not in English class, but the more time they spend with that, the more they kind of start to feel the rhythm of the game. And the second part of that is something from an offensive perspective, which is like, okay, like you're saying, right? We're always hunting that guy on an island, right? And if we can find a guy on an island who's not the best coverage player and we can manufacture that, or we just get lucky and they do that,
Mhm.
I mean, that's great for us. The thing about 8-man football though is if you want to force a team to make their worst coverage player play on an island, you're probably going to have to put 2 or 3 guys in the route, right? And if you're doing that, those are guys you're taking out of the blocking phase, and now you're talking, hey, we have very little time, right?
Right.
And you can coach your guys up. And we've been lucky, right? Especially the last 2 years, we've had guys up front who are just really good. And that's given us the time to do some stuff like that. I mean, we had a pure pocket passer for 2 years, which you don't
Right.
see often in 8-man football, but he rarely got hit. We were lucky, right? Quick game. Guys up front are pretty good. But that is the worry, right? Like you can get that matchup and hey, I don't have a tackle. And if that kid knows how to rush the passer, that end or that linebacker's coming, right? It doesn't really matter if he's on an island. So
Right.
those two things kind of work together. So yeah, I mean, the on an island thing, that's true of your cornerbacks, it's true of your linebackers and safeties, it's also true of your guards. And
Right.
it's also probably true of your center, and it's also true of your halfback who's got to pick somebody up in protection unless he's in the route, in which case, hey, if they bring one extra guy, man, like you got 2 seconds and you better
Right.
find that guy and you better get it out. So a lot of, I think kind of a theme here is that, man, 8-man football, everybody's on an island. Those islands look different, but that's where
Yeah.
everybody is.
Well, and some teams do it different. I feel like the downstate teams you see a little bit more of. They'll put a safety deep. I feel like when you look
Yeah,
around
true.
here, a lot of teams will sometimes leave guys uncovered and just bring pressure. We've seen
We like
that,
that.
right?
That's nice when
You
they do
know,
that.
right? If you can
Yeah.
pick it up, you're looking at a touchdown. But I mean, that's
Yeah.
you see those total different ends of the spectrum where I don't feel like you see that 11-man football. I mean, you're going to get pressure, but the pressure's covered, using a zone, right? But I mean, I feel like 8-man, you got to know the team you're playing, and one team's going to be aggressive on 3rd and 8, and then next team's going to maybe play a little bit softer. But that's kind of what makes it fun to me, you know.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And that's right. That's the tension there. I think that, the true drop back game, most teams aren't very good at it because they can't major in it. Like we said, right? Your halfback and your quarterback kind of have to be the same guy in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. But yeah, I mean, the play action stuff can just, especially when your quarterback's a halfback. So yeah. Yeah. All right.
All right, I'll kind of roll us into that next topic here because I feel like this really, kind of targets, you in the offense. I'm just, what is that one wrinkle in 8-player football with, on offense specifically that you think just won't work in the 11-man game?
Well, for me primarily, and I don't know, there's probably a lot of different answers to this question, right? But for me, and something that we've leaned into a lot is not blocking an edge defender, and not just the backside, right? But this past year, we got really good at identifying who's the and not generally not like overhangs, not an outside linebacker, but like a defensive end, right? Who we just don't have to block, right? And we can go in that direction, and because the edges are tighter, right? Because he's not playing on
Mhm.
the outside hip of a tackle or tight end. If you have any speed in the backfield, you can get the corner on him, and you just don't have to block him, right? So we will, and we had fast guards, so we will pull those guards, like the play side guard, to the edge, just not touch that end, right?
Mhm.
And I think we got to be able to adjust that on the fly, right? Like sometimes we will come down and crack that guy, we will reach that guy, but once we identify, hey, this is not a guy who can run down our halfback or our quarterback or a jet sweep, we just won't block them. And I don't think that you see that in 11-man football, right? A play side edge defender who we're just not going to block, and we're going to get the corner
Right.
on them, and there's nothing you can do about it. And our guys got really good by the end of the year of saying, hey, this is not, and they would know going into the game, tape, and then we would tell them, 40, whatever number, 48.
Yeah.
We're going to skip them on our pin pull stuff, right? And they would even come to us in game and say, I don't think we need to block them. And we go, okay, well, if you're wrong, but we'll give it a shot, right? And that puts a lot of pressure on that guy, because that guy, that end has to worry, hey, is this power? Is this trap? Whatever. And now we're just skip pulling out of there, and he's got to chase down whether it's a halfback or receiver or our quarterback this year who could really run. I don't think that translates, right? Because the edges are so much shorter in 8-man football. I don't know if you could do that against a true, like, a defensive end in 11-man football. So that's a big one for us. That's something that we've weaponized a lot, and that's the primary thing. The other thing that we do that I don't know, I think there are 11-man teams that do this, but something that we started doing a couple of years ago, we didn't do as much this year because we just had a different type of quarterback and different type of team. But hey, if we get soft coverage on the edge, especially to the field, right? I don't care what we called. It doesn't matter. You turn and you get that ball out there now, right? Because again, you break one tackle, see you later. There's no safety help over the top, right? It's over, right? So if you like a matchup or you like a depth, go ahead and go for it, right? Because if we can get 6 on that play, that's a great position for us, right? And we get the ball back sooner and all that. So those are two things. But the primary one, I would say, we're just not blocking a lot of guys,
right?
Because
which is
they
unusual.
are stuck so close. Yeah, right. And obviously there are guys. The team we played in the state semifinal this year, those were guys we had to block, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not every week, it's not all the time, but when we do identify it, hey, that's another guy in the blocking face, right? That's another linebacker that we can chip or crack, right? That's somewhere else we can send the receiver or a wing or whatever. So just finding that and being, the first time we did it, it's like, oh, so we're just not going to block them. Who would have ever thought? But it's paid off quite a bit. So
yeah, I'll jump right into the defense. I mean, I think offensively, the way you guys, I didn't know if it was going to work at first, but obviously having those fast guards and the way you guys coach them, I mean, it was fun to watch. To watch a guy try and chase down a guard on the play side and not be able to make the tackle. You think as a defensive coordinator, you worry about teams doing it to you, but I don't know. Nobody's been able to replicate it. So I think, the way you guys coach it and the way you guys work together this year and putting that stuff in was a lot of fun to watch. But defensively, the one thing you see on defense is you see a lot of these chaotic defenses, right? And I think I like structure, and you get a lot more structure in the defense in 11-man football, right? You got your 5-2s, you got your 4-3s, you have your different fronts and you can move guys around, but it's pretty structured. Guys have a role and they have a technique. We'll play teams in 8-man football where there's one down lineman and there's guys just blitzing all over the place. And it's like, it works because there's 3 offensive linemen in front of them and maybe a tight end, and you can get there so quickly. And I just don't think, I don't think that would work in 11-man football. If you got 2 tackles or 2 tight ends, I just don't think you're going to get there quick enough, and you're going to create some massive lanes, but you can't create those lanes in the 8-man game, or you can close those lanes down because there's not as many of them. So I think that's one thing, we've done a little bit of that, and I don't love doing it because it just goes against my kind of inline thinking, but we've done some of it and it has worked. I feel like it works probably better in like pass rushing kind of situations, maybe create a little confusion. But I know there's some really good football teams in 8-man football, more specifically downstate, that's primarily what they do. They line up with 1 or 2 down linemen, and there's guys coming all over the place, and it can make it tough for the offensive linemen if they don't have a lot of film, or if they're not used to seeing that kind of stuff. It can create a lot of confusion. But I also think from watching film, you did see some of those teams at times get gashed a little bit, but definitely, I don't know. I don't see that working in the 11-man game.
Well, and from a play calling perspective, I much prefer a structured defense, right? Mm-hmm. If I know where those guys are going to be lined up or have an idea where they're going to be, and you can and learn tendency in that, that's something you can handle. But like, we got a team up the road who we play all the time, and they've won what? I don't know, 7 state championships,
A lot.
7 state yeah. And they had really good players, but the hardest part for me of coaching against that program was it wasn't always clear, right? Whose responsibility was what on the defensive side of the ball. And they really weaponized that. It helped that they had the fastest guys and the strongest guys and the best football players, but not being able to say where this guy's going to be on this play is difficult, you know. And then you get these other teams who they got good players too, but hey, I know exactly where that end's going to be. I know where the outside linebacker is going to be. I know what the corner is going to do. So yeah, that chaos can be difficult to deal with the, like you said, with the smaller blocking face. But yeah,
Would you see that working in 11 man? Do you think that could
no,
go?
no. I mean, what you said, and it's also something we talked about earlier with the scoring, right? Which is in 8-man football, the name of the game on defense, I think, is negative plays and understanding that you're going to get scored on, right? So that makes sense that then you would want to play a defense that, hey, I might leave a gap, right? And if we get scored on, that's probably what's going to happen anyway. But if I can give that gap, but also make a play in the backfield, right. Once. And force a team into a 3rd and long or a punting situation, right? You might have just won the game. So it makes a lot of sense for 8-man football, 11-man football. I mean, when you can just pound teams, right? And like you just said, right? There's 2 extra gaps. So if you're going to leave in 8-man football, if you're leaving 1 gap, we might not hit it. But if you're going to leave 2, 3, 4, you know, in 11-man football, it's just not going to work. So yeah, that's really good point. And I, you know, the 1 down lineman thing, the twists and stunts in 8-man football are just like, they're so hard to deal with. Especially, I mean, like you said, you got 3 guys. And if there's a 4th, you know, you're running into a problem. All right. Last thing, you know, when we talk about, I was just reading a book, and one of the things they were talking about was Friday Night Lights, like the novel and then the TV show, and also, or not the novel, but the book, the TV show, and just how much football means. And obviously, we're not coaching in West Texas, right? But all these programs around here, all these schools take a lot of pride in, it's not just football, it's basketball. If it's our school, it's cheer, right? But 8-man football is still football, and it still means a lot to a lot of people. And it's important that we keep it alive. So if you could give one piece of advice as a head coach who is, I think, doing a great job with your program, one piece of advice to a coach who's making this transition from 11-man football to 8-man football, what would you tell him?
I mean, kind of like you said, it's still football. I don't feel any different stepping out on the field Friday night playing 8-man football than I did 10 years ago coaching 11-man or as a player. There's still people in the stands. They're still there to watch football. You know what? I'll be the first to admit when there was schools around Norway going to 8-man football, I kind of laughed and said, well, that'll never be us. We're not playing 8-man football. I mean, come on, that's not real football. And that was my first thought. And when Norway was finally getting to that point in 2020, 2021, where it was like, if we want to have football, we're going to have to play 8-man football.
Right.
That first year, it was different as far as the gameplay, but Friday night was still Friday night. You know, the cheerleaders were still there. The girls were still wearing the players' jerseys. Mom and dad was still there. We still had the announcer. You know, we don't have a band right now. I know we're trying to get that back, but I mean, it was still Friday night. It was still on TV6 and Marquette. I mean, you still had all those same elements, and I would say it's still blocking and tackling. It's still all the fundamentals. I would even argue that maybe there is even a little bit more hitting if you like that kind of stuff in 8-man football because there's a lot of one-on-one tackling. But yeah, I don't think after a few years now, 4 or 5 years of coaching it, that it's any different. Besides, there's a few less people on the field. I mean, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like it still feels like football to you on Friday night?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, the quality of our games and the enjoyment that I've taken from Norway football games has increased since we moved to 8-man football. And probably part of that is because we're just more competitive, right? Towards the end of 11-man football, we were showing up to games with 14 guys by the end of the year, right? And there's just a limit to what you can do with that. So yeah, I mean, like this league that we're in now and the conferences, you know, seem to always be changing right now as more teams drop into 8-man football, but the leagues now are really competitive, and there are a lot of teams from the UP, the Upper Peninsula, that compete at a high level, right? And beat a lot, you know, win state championships, play for state championships, play for state semifinals, win regionals, whatever. As the league gets bigger, the competition has risen quite a bit. And I think that like our community and families and former players have started to recognize that, right? And they're
Mhm.
starting to show up to these games, and they're starting to really be invested in these kids, because really at the end of the day, right, like that's what it's about. And creating that atmosphere, it's great for us, and it's great for
Mhm.
the parents, it's great for the community, but it's really great for the kids.
Right.
And there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. And as coaches, the most important thing is like what you just said. This is, guys, this is football, right? You got to block, you got to tackle, you got to catch, you got to throw. And the type of player changes, and different guys can do different stuff, but it still means the same thing to a lot of kids. And if you can foster that, it's important.
Mhm.
So yeah, you hit the nail
Well,
on the head, man.
yeah, I mean, a lot of and our players, right? At this point, that's all they've played.
That's right.
So they don't know any different. And I think as more time goes by, the parents won't know much different either. So
Right.
yeah, to me, it's still Friday Night Lights, like the movie and the book you read. So I definitely wouldn't, looking back, I would change my mind about how I initially felt. And I mean, to me, it's more fun than 11 man because there's a little more action. I feel
Yeah.
like, so all right, coach. Well, I feel like that's a wrap on our first run through here on our first ever, like I said, whatever we want to call it, a podcast or a YouTube channel. We're going to work out the kinks, but overall, I think for our three man down podcast, it went pretty well.
Yeah. Good job.